Malcolm Little was born on the 19th of May in 1925 in the hospital of Omaha when his mother was 28. Malcolm had three half-siblings from his father's previous marriage, Ella, Earl, and Mary. And when his father moved to Philadelphia, he married Malcolm's mother, who gave him 6 children, including Malcolm: Wilfred, Hilda, Filbert, Reginald, and Yvonne. Malcolm's father, Earl Little, was a Baptist minister and a dedicated organizer for Marcus Garvey's UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, whose cause involved encouraging the black masses to return to Africa, as he and Marcus Garvey believed that freedom, independence, and self-respect could not be achieved by the black man in America. Earl Little would earn his living by preaching to churches. Malcolm's mother, Louise Little, her father was a white man, which was the reason why she had light skin and straight black hair. She looked like a white woman. Malcolm grew up witnessing his parents always at odds, arguing. He sometimes witnessed his father beating his mother. This could have been because his mother was educated and his father was not, so she would sometimes correct him, in turn ridiculing him. Something which I found interesting was that Malcolm's father was harsh and aggressive towards his other children, except for Malcolm, so much so that he would beat them severely if they broke any of his rules. This was probably because, as anti-white as he was also so subconsciously afflicted with the white man's brainwashing that he is superior, which resulted in him inclining to favor the lighter skin, and Malcolm was the lightest amongst his siblings. However, Malcolm's mother was the total opposite. She gave him the most beatings and showed most affection to Wilfred, who was the darkest child. This was perhaps because she did not want Malcolm to become afflicted with the sense that he was better because he was lighter. Whenever his mother showed any signs of giving him a whipping, by say raising her hand, Malcolm would open his mouth and scream, and if there were any onlookers, she would change her mind out of being ashamed of what they may think. Also, he saw in a young age that his siblings, if ever they wanted anything, for example, a butter biscuit, she would say no, and they would settle with that. However, Malcolm would cry out and make a fuss until he got what he wanted. So early on, he learned that if you want something, then you better make some noise. This was where his famous saying came from: "It's the hinge that squeaks that gets the grease." Malcolm attended school when he was 5 with his 3 elder siblings, Wilfred, Hilda, and Filbert. They were the only black children to go to that school. However, the other white kids did not treat them any different besides call them names like nigger, darky, or rustus. About a year later, in 1931, something terrible happened. One day, when Malcolm and his siblings returned from school, they found their parents having one of their arguments. His father got so angry that he slammed out the front door and began walking up the road towards town, leaving his mother crying. Malcolm and his siblings went to bed that night without their father back yet. Later that night, the kids woke up to the screams of their mother, who had just heard the news of her husband's death. This tragedy left Louise Little widowed at the age of 34, with 9 children to take care of. She was forced to live off state welfare. When Malcolm was around 9 years old, after school he would sometimes go into town and steal little treats for himself, like apples, since they were in such a financially poor state. After having been caught stealing several times, the state welfare visited their home, and seeing that his mother was becoming mentally unstable since she began talking to herself and no longer paid any attention to her home or the children, the state welfare forced Malcolm into moving in with a white foster family, who he had already knew. Malcolm blames the state welfare for separating his family, as they would be rude towards his mother by calling her crazy before she even showed any signs of mental instability, and constantly pushing the idea to her and her children to become fostered. Soon, when his mother suffered a complete breakdown, she was sent to a mental hospital, and the rest of the children were separated, sent to different homes. When Malcolm was 13, he got expelled from his school after planting a thumbtack on the chair of his teacher. This resulted in him also being taken out of the Governor's house and into a detention center for mischievous kids away from Lansing in Mason, Michigan. Although the carer, Mrs. Swirling, at the detention center was nice and generous towards him, he felt less like a person and more like a pet. He felt that although he was with them, he was not considered of them. Malcolm then entered into 7th grade at his new school, Mason Junior High School. Also, he got his first job in a restaurant, washing dishes after school. His favorite subjects were English and history, and his least favorite subject was math. He found out that there wasn't much history of the black man in the textbooks. And he would often hear his history teacher making racist jokes about the black people. He joined the basketball team and found that he was really good at it. Malcolm was elected as class president by his class. He was the smartest and had the highest grades. One day, one of his teachers, who he admired, asked him what he wanted to be in the future. Malcolm replied by saying that he wanted to be a lawyer, but the teacher instead told him that he must be realistic, and as a black man, he couldn't be. So he advised him to be a carpenter instead. It made Malcolm disturbed and uneasy that this same teacher, who would encourage other white kids to take up high-ranking professions, but for Malcolm, he showed a different side. From this instance, Malcolm's perception changed. Although he knew that everyone liked him, he did not feel truly accepted by them. He realized then that although he was smarter than all the other kids, he was still not smart enough in their eyes to decide what he wanted to be. From then on, Malcolm drew away from the other kids, and he would only speak when he was spoken to. And where usually, if racist remarks were made, he wouldn't care. Now, if he heard such, he would stop and look at whoever said it. Mrs. Swirling and the other white kids at the detention center saw that Malcolm had changed. They felt that Malcolm was no longer happy staying with them, and because he was well behaved now, they decided to send him to live with one of the white families who Malcolm knew well. After 8th grade, Malcolm moved to Boston to live with his half-sister Ella. This move was to change his whole life. Malcolm got a job in Boston as a shoeshine boy and made friends with a guy named Shorty, who was about 10 years older than him. Malcolm was only around 15, but because of how tall he was, people mistaken him as an adult. However, Malcolm did not tell anyone his real age. Malcolm soon adopts the urban way of living. He has a change of clothes, begins smoking cigars and cigarettes, and even drinks for the first time. He buys a zoot, a type of suit, and changes his hairstyle. He gets a conch. All from the influence from his best friend Shorty and working in the ballroom where he used to shine shoes. Malcolm loved the ghetto life. Malcolm soon quits his shoeshine job. His sister Ella then gets him a job as a clerk for a drugstore. At the ballroom, Malcolm met Sophia, a rich white girl who was into him. Malcolm wanted her as a girlfriend, because in those days, a black man with a white woman was a status symbol. Malcolm soon finds a job washing dishes on a Boston to Washington train line, and then selling sandwiches as a porter in a Boston to New York train line. Malcolm then moves to New York, in Harlem. 1942, when Malcolm is 17 years old, he is hired at Small's Bar. Harlem was full of many black people. Malcolm begins investing a lot of money in the numbers rackets, a popular, unofficial lottery in Harlem. Malcolm meets a pimp named Sammy. They became really close friends. He then loses his job at Small's Bar, and with the help of Sammy the pimp, he starts selling weed. Malcolm would still see Sophia, and around this time she was married to a white man in Boston, but that didn't cause her to stop seeing him, since her husband had no idea of Malcolm and Sophia's relationship. Malcolm makes a lot of money selling weed. It became a full-time job for him. He also started to keep a gun with him. Malcolm soon quits his dope selling due to detectives who were onto him. He would be checked for drugs regularly. Although he was never caught with them, he decided to quit as it was getting risky. He moved on to robbery, where he and Sammy would go to stores and point a gun at the owner and order cash. He also got into doing heavier drugs such as cocaine. Along with his robbery, he has various odd jobs like escorting white men to prostitutes and working for a bootlegger. Malcolm eventually no longer feels safe in New York, so he decides to move to Boston, where he is happy to meet Shorty again. In Boston, Malcolm is still going at it with the narcotics, cocaine and marijuana. Soon, he and Shorty become in need of money, so they decide to do house burglary. Shorty gets his friend in on it, named Rudy. Malcolm asks Sophia and her sister to join. They would do their burglary at night. Malcolm and Shorty, the robbers, and Rudy in the getaway car, and Sophia and her sister would scout the house prior to the burglary. Eventually, Malcolm is arrested after being caught stealing. He is convicted of larceny, breaking and entering, and carrying a weapon. In 1946, he and Shorty get 8 to 10 years imprisonment in the Charlestown prison. Least did Malcolm know, however, that prison was to change his entire life. That prison was to change who he thought he was.